3:14 a.m. A freezing night in Michigan. A senior engineer stands outside the Rouge Electric Vehicle Center, watching an orange glow through the fence of a lot that doesn't exist on any official map. He makes a phone call that will cost Ford $6 billion and potentially destroy America's most iconic truck brand. 3 words. Thermal runaway propagation. Not a software bug. Not a manufacturing hiccup. A catastrophic failure that reveals Ford bet everything on a transition that never came, using battery technology that wasn't ready. Rushed to market to beat a competitor that ended up beating itself. This is the story of how America's best-selling vehicle became a $6 billion black hole. This is the forensic autopsy of the F-150 lightning disaster. The midnight call. The phone call came at 3:14 a.m. originating from a burner device located 3 miles outside the perimeter of the Rouge Electric Vehicle Center in Dearborn. The voice on the other end wasn't a corporate PR representative or a marketing executive spinning a narrative about the future of mobility. It was a senior battery integration engineer, his breath visible in the freezing Michigan air, watching a silent, terrifying glow emanate from a holding lot that didn't officially exist on the company's public maps. He whispered 3 words that would eventually cost the Ford Motor Company $6 billion and threatened to dismantle the legacy of an American icon: thermal runaway propagation. The glow he was watching wasn't a reflection from the nearby factory lights. It was the telltale signature of lithium-ion batteries entering a critical failure state, a chain reaction where one cell's failure triggers its neighbors, creating a cascading thermal event that can reach temperatures exceeding 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Our source described the scene with clinical precision. There were approximately 40 trucks in that lot. We called them observation units, vehicles that had shown anomalous voltage readings during pre-delivery inspection but hadn't yet been flagged for full recall. At around 2:45 a.m., the thermal monitoring sensors started sending alerts. By 3 a.m., we could see the first visible signs of venting. By 3:10, we had active combustion. This wasn't the first incident. It was simply the one that couldn't be contained quietly. The holding lot he referenced doesn't appear on Ford's publicly available facility maps. It's designated internally as Quarantine Zone Delta, a staging area for vehicles awaiting engineering review. At its peak capacity in early 2024, this lot held over 200 F-150 Lightning units, trucks that had been built but couldn't be delivered due to battery safety concerns that hadn't yet become public knowledge. The financial hemorrhage. This wasn't just a manufacturing defect or a software glitch. It was the canary in the coal mine for a gamble so massive, so recklessly accelerated, that it turned the country's best-selling vehicle into a financial black hole. To understand the magnitude of this disaster, we have to strip away the glossy Super Bowl commercials and the confident press releases from CEO Jim Farley. We need to look at the forensic data hidden inside the quarterly reports of Ford's Model E division, a separate business unit created to chase Tesla, which is currently losing nearly $50,000 on every single electric vehicle it sells. Let that sink in. Every single F-150 Lightning that rolls off the assembly line and gets delivered to a customer represents a $50,000 loss for Ford. Not a slim margin. Not break-even pricing during a launch phase. An actual, staggering $50,000 deficit per unit. The math is brutal. At an average transaction price of $75,000, Ford is spending approximately $125,000 to manufacture, warranty, and support each Lightning. This includes the direct manufacturing costs, the amortized tooling expenses, the battery procurement costs, and the escalating warranty reserves that Ford has been quietly building quarter after quarter. Industry analysts initially dismissed these figures as investment losses, the acceptable cost of entering a new market segment. But as production volumes increased and the losses accelerated rather than decreased, it became clear this wasn't a scaling problem. It was a fundamental economics problem. The $6 billion loss reported in fiscal 2024 isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It represents a fundamental failure of strategy. It represents the cost of retooling factories for vehicles that people aren't buying at the projected rates, the cost of emergency engineering fixes, and the staggering cost of warranty claims that are projected to haunt Ford for the next decade. But the financial hemorrhage is only the symptom. The disease lies deep within the engineering shortcuts taken during the frantic race to beat the Cybertruck to market. The chemistry gamble. The story begins not in a boardroom, but in the chemistry of the NCM9 battery cells supplied by SK On. These high-nickel cells were supposed to be the holy grail of energy density, allowing a massive truck to achieve reasonable range without requiring a battery pack so large it consumed all payload capacity. NCM9 refers to the cathode chemistry, 90% nickel, 5% cobalt, 5% manganese. The high nickel content increases energy density significantly compared to previous generation NCM811 or NCM622 cells. In theory, this allows you to pack more kilowatt-hours into the same physical volume, giving you more range without more weight. But high nickel cathodes come with serious stability risks. Nickel is reactive. At high states of charge or elevated temperatures, high nickel cathodes become prone to oxygen release, which can trigger thermal runaway. The separator, a thin polymer membrane that keeps the anode and cathode from touching, becomes the only thing preventing a catastrophic short circuit. Documents leaked to internal auditors suggest that the pressure to ramp up production led to quality control lapses at the cell manufacturing level that were statistically inevitable yet corporately ignored. The SK On facility in Georgia, built specifically to supply Ford's EV ambitions, was scaling production at an unprecedented rate. Industry norms suggest that new battery manufacturing lines should operate at 60 to 70% capacity for the first 12 to 18 months while processes are refined and yield rates improve. SK On was running at 90% plus capacity within 6 months of the line activation. The result was predictable to anyone with lithium-ion manufacturing experience: inconsistent separator thickness, microcontamination during electrode coating, and insufficient aging time before cells were packed and shipped to Ford. When you compress a development cycle that typically takes 5 years into 3, something has to break. In this case, it wasn't a suspension strut or a transmission gear. It was the anode-cathode separation layers within the battery modules. Former quality engineers from the supplier described a culture of "ship it and fix it later," a mentality borrowed from software development but catastrophically inappropriate for battery chemistry. Cells that failed initial testing weren't scrapped. They were retested under different parameters until they passed. Cells that showed marginal performance weren't investigated. They were packaged and shipped with the assumption that the battery management system would compensate. The production halt. The result was a catastrophic pause in production in early 2024. A halt that sent shockwaves through the supply chain and left thousands of trucks sitting in holding lots, their batteries slowly draining, their resale value plummeting before they even reached a dealership. The official recall notice, filed with NHTSA in February 2024, cited potential battery overheating during DC fast charging. This bureaucratic language obscured the reality. Ford had discovered that under certain conditions, cold ambient temperatures, followed by aggressive DC fast charging to above 90% state of charge, the battery management system could lose its ability to detect cell-level voltage imbalances. When cells become imbalanced, the weakest cells are pushed beyond their safe voltage limits during charging. This accelerates degradation and, in extreme cases, can cause lithium plating on the anode, a precursor to internal short circuits and thermal runaway. The stop-ship order affected every lightning in the production pipeline. Trucks already at dealerships were placed under "Do Not Deliver" holds. Trucks in transit were diverted to holding facilities. The Rouge plant went dark for 6 weeks while engineers scrambled to develop a diagnostic protocol to identify which battery packs were safe and which needed to be replaced entirely. The financial impact was immediate and devastating. Ford's supplier contracts included penalty clauses for production interruptions. Dealerships demanded compensation for lost sales. Early adopters who had received vehicles before the halt demanded answers about whether their trucks were safe. And then there were the fires. The fires they hid, while Ford publicly acknowledged the recall. What they didn't disclose was the number of thermal events that had already occurred in customer hands, in dealership lots, and in those quarantine zones. Through Freedom of Information Act requests filed with local fire departments, we obtained incident reports from 17 separate battery fires involving F-150 Lightning vehicles between November 2023 and March 2024. 17 fires. Not all of them resulted in total vehicle loss, but all of them involved battery pack damage severe enough to require complete replacement. One incident in Colorado involved a Lightning that had been charging overnight in a residential garage. The homeowner awoke to smoke detectors and discovered his truck engulfed in flames. The fire spread to the structure, resulting in $340,000 in property damage. Ford quietly settled with the homeowner under a non-disclosure agreement. Another incident in Texas involved a Lightning at a dealership that spontaneously entered thermal runaway while parked and unplugged. Security footage showed the initial venting event, white smoke pouring from the undercarriage, followed 20 minutes later by active flames. The dealership's sprinkler system activated, but water is largely ineffective against lithium-ion battery fires. The truck burned for over 4 hours before firefighters were able to contain it using specialized foam. These incidents weren't isolated anomalies. They were symptoms of systemic issues in battery quality control that Ford's engineering teams had identified months before the public recall. Internal emails obtained through discovery in a separate lawsuit reveal that battery engineers raised red flags as early as September 2023, warning that the voltage irregularities they were seeing in pre-production testing suggested potential field failure rates unacceptable for public deployment. Management's response, according to the emails, was to refine the diagnostic criteria and implement software mitigation strategies. Corporate speak for lowering the threshold for what qualified as a defective battery and hoping that software could mask the hardware problems. The ownership nightmare. But the recall is just the tip of the iceberg. The real scandal is the miscalculation of the American consumer. Ford bet the farm, specifically the revenue from their profitable ICE division, on a rapid transition that simply didn't materialize. Dealers began turning away allocations. Inventory days on lots swelled to triple digits. The Lightning, which was supposed to strike the market with the force of a storm, instead short-circuited the company's profitability. We obtained service bulletins that paint a grim picture of the ownership experience for the early adopters, module replacements taking months, software updates that brick the infotainment systems, and a phantom battery drain that leaves owners stranded in cold climates. One owner in Minnesota reported that his Lightning lost 60% of its range overnight when temperatures dropped below 0 Fahrenheit. He plugged in with a displayed 285 miles of range. 8 hours later, the truck showed 112 miles. No charging had occurred. The battery management system had shut down charging due to low temperature, but the battery had continued to drain power to run its thermal management system in an attempt to warm itself. When he contacted Ford customer service, he was told this was normal behavior, and that he should have plugged in with the preconditioning feature enabled. The owner's manual made no mention of this limitation. The salesman who sold him the truck certainly hadn't mentioned it. This is the hidden cost of being a beta tester for a legacy automaker trying to learn Silicon Valley tactics overnight. Service departments are overwhelmed. Technicians trained for decades on internal combustion engines are now expected to diagnose high-voltage battery systems using diagnostic software that crashes more often than it provides useful data. One dealership service manager told us, We get these trucks in with error codes we've never seen. We call Ford technical support, and half the time they tell us they don't know either. They tell us to replace the entire battery pack, a $35,000 part with a 6-month backorder. Meanwhile, the customer's truck sits in our lot for months. They're making payments on a vehicle they can't use. And we're liable if something goes wrong. The parts shortage is crippling. Because the Lightning uses bespoke components, different motors, different inverters, different battery modules than other Ford EVs, there's no parts commonality to draw from. When a component fails, you wait for SK On to manufacture a replacement, ship it from Korea, and hope it doesn't fail the same way. The resale collapse. And then there's the resale market, where the true cost of Ford's mistakes becomes impossible to hide. Brand new F-150 Lightnings with dealer markups were selling for $90,000 plus in 2022. 2 years later, those same trucks are wholesaling at auctions for $42,000 to $48,000. That's a 50% depreciation in 24 months, catastrophic by any automotive standard, but especially devastating for trucks, which traditionally hold value better than passenger cars. The resale collapse is driven by multiple factors. Battery anxiety. Potential buyers are terrified of inheriting someone else's battery degradation. Unlike a used ICE truck where you can inspect the engine and transmission, battery health is opaque. The displayed range could be accurate, or it could be optimistic. There's no way for a used buyer to know if they're getting a battery with 95% health or 75% health. Recall stigma. The multiple recalls have permanently tarnished the Lightning's reputation. Even trucks that have had their batteries replaced carry the stigma of being the truck that catches fire. Warranty uncertainty. Ford's battery warranty is 8 years per 100,000 miles, but it doesn't transfer cleanly to second owners in some states. Buyers are discovering that the warranty coverage they assumed was transferable actually requires dealer verification, and in some cases, exclusions based on charging history. Infrastructure reality. The initial Lightning buyers were early adopters with home charging and flexible lifestyles. The secondary market is price-sensitive buyers who need a truck for work, and many of them don't have charging at home or workplace. They're discovering that relying on public DC fast charging is expensive, often $0, $40-0, 60/kWh, and inconvenient. One wholesaler in Texas told us, "I won't touch Lightnings anymore. I took 3 of them on trade and lost my shirt. They sit on my lot for 90+ days while gas F-150 sell in a week. And when they finally sell, it's at a loss." The market has spoken. Nobody wants a used electric truck with question marks around its battery. The strategic catastrophe. The $6 billion loss reported isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It represents a fundamental failure of strategy. It represents the cost of retooling factories for vehicles that people aren't buying at the projected rates, the cost of emergency engineering fixes, and the staggering cost of warranty claims that are projected to haunt Ford for the next decade. When CEO Jim Farley split Ford into Ford Blue, ICE vehicles, and Ford Model E, EVs, in 2022, the strategy was clear. Insulate the profitable ICE business from the losses of EV development, while giving Wall Street a clean view of the EV business unit's progress toward profitability. What he didn't anticipate was just how deep and prolonged those losses would be. Model E lost $4.7 billion in 2023. It's on track to lose over $5.5 billion in 2024. And internal projections suggest it won't reach profitability until 2027, and that's assuming demand recovers, costs decrease, and no further recalls occur. None of those assumptions look realistic today. The demand picture has softened dramatically. Ford sold 24,165 Lightnings in 2023, respectable, but far below the 150,000/year capacity they built. In 2024, sales are tracking toward 18,000 units, a decline despite increased inventory and aggressive incentives. the cost picture is locked in. Ford signed long-term supply contracts with SK On at battery prices negotiated when everyone assumed exponential demand growth. Those contracts guarantee minimum purchase volumes at prices that are now above market rates. Ford is contractually obligated to buy batteries they can't profitably use. And the recall situation is evolving, not resolving. The initial battery replacement program addressed the most acute safety issues, but it didn't solve the underlying chemistry problems. As the first generation of fixed batteries age, new degradation patterns are emerging. The supplier stranglehold. As we dig deeper into the supplier contracts, we find that Ford is locked into purchase agreements for battery materials at prices that make profitability mathematically impossible for years. The SK On contract, which runs through 2028, obligates Ford to purchase a minimum of 60 GWh of battery capacity annually. At current Lightning production rates, Ford needs approximately 18 to 20 GWh. The excess capacity was supposed to supply the electric Transit, the electric Explorer, and future models. But those programs are delayed or scaled back, leaving Ford paying for batteries they don't need. The contract pricing was negotiated in 2021 when lithium carbonate was $15,000 per ton and everyone expected shortages. Today, lithium is trading at $11,000 per ton and falling due to oversupply from Chinese producers. Ford is paying 2021 prices for 2024 batteries in a collapsing commodity market. They are selling dollars for 50 cents, hoping that volume will eventually cure the deficit. But volume is the one thing they don't have. The demand has softened, the competition has stiffened, and the trust has been broken. The engineering cover-up. When we analyze the telemetry data from the affected trucks, we see a pattern of voltage irregularities that precede the critical failures, data that Ford's engineers certainly saw, but which didn't stop the assembly lines until the fires became public news. Battery management systems in modern EVs collect thousands of data points per second, individual cell voltages, temperatures, current flow, state of charge, cycle counts, and more. This data is logged and transmitted back to the manufacturer through cellular connectivity, ostensibly to enable over-the-air updates, but also to provide early warning of field failures. Ford's engineers were receiving this data in real time from every Lightning on the road. And the data was screaming warnings. Voltage delta, the difference between the highest and lowest cell voltage in a pack, is a key indicator of battery health. In a healthy pack, this delta should be under 10 millivolts. The Lightning packs were showing deltas of 50 to 100 millivolts, and in some cases, over 200 millivolts. This level of imbalance indicates serious problems, manufacturing defects in individual cells, degradation occurring at different rates, or BMS calibration errors. Any of these should have triggered immediate investigation. Instead, according to internal communications, Ford's response was to adjust the software thresholds that defined acceptable imbalance, effectively teaching the BMS to ignore the warning signs. One engineer described it as moving the goalposts so the field goal counts. Rather than fix the underlying problem, they redefined what counted as a problem. This decision, which saved Ford from an immediate mass recall in late 2023, ultimately made the 2024 recall more severe, more expensive, and more dangerous. The dealer revolt. Ford's traditional strength has always been its dealer network, over 3,000 franchises across North America that sell, service, and support Ford vehicles. But the Lightning has turned that strength into a liability. Dealers were required to invest $500, $1,000 in charging infrastructure, training, and tools to become certified EV dealers, eligible to sell the Lightning. Many dealers, especially in rural areas, took on debt to make these investments based on Ford's projections of demand. Those projections were fantasy. Dealers are now sitting on unsold inventory, paying floor plan interest on trucks that aren't moving, and fielding angry calls from customers whose trucks are stuck in service limbo. The National Automobile Dealers Association privately surveyed Ford dealers in mid-2024. The results, leaked to automotive trade publications, were damning. 68% of dealers reported that Lightning inventory was a significant financial burden. 43% stated they would not order additional Lightning allocation. If given the choice, 71% said customer satisfaction with Lightning service experience was below acceptable. 52% reported that the Lightning program had damaged their relationship with Ford Corporate. This is a dealer revolt in slow motion. And for Ford, whose entire business model depends on dealer loyalty and advocacy, it's potentially more dangerous than the $6 billion loss. The pivot to hybrids. This documentary investigates the specific timeline of the stop-ship order, the internal memos regarding battery density risks, and the frantic pivot to hybrids that Ford is now attempting to execute to save face. In May 2024, Jim Farley announced a strategic reassessment of Ford's EV plans. Translation: we're scaling back because the market isn't there, and we can't afford to keep losing billions. The new strategy prioritizes hybrids, specifically hybrid F-150s and hybrid SUVs that offer better fuel economy without the range anxiety, charging infrastructure dependence, or battery cost burden of pure EVs. This makes sense from a business perspective. Ford's hybrid systems are proven, profitable, and popular with customers who want better efficiency without lifestyle compromises. But it's a stunning admission of failure. Just 2 years ago, Farley was proclaiming that Ford would lead the electric revolution, that the Lightning would change the game, and that pure EVs were the future of the company. Now, quietly, Ford is acknowledging what Toyota has been saying all along: for most customers, in most use cases, hybrids are a better solution than battery EVs. The pivot is expensive. Retooling plants, canceling battery contracts, and paying the penalties. Refocusing R&D, and managing the reputational damage of admitting that the emperor has no clothes. The collapse continues. The $6 billion disaster is not ending. It is evolving into a chronic condition that may force a complete restructuring of the company. Ford's stock price has declined 28% since the peak of EV enthusiasm in 2021. Wall Street has lost patience with the Model E losses and is demanding profitability or consolidation. Credit rating agencies have downgraded Ford's debt outlook from stable to negative, citing the ongoing EV losses and uncertain path to profitability. And internally, there's a brain drain. Engineers who joined Ford to work on exciting EV technology are leaving for startups, for Tesla, for Rivian, anywhere that isn't hemorrhaging cash and credibility. We are witnessing the potential end of Ford as we know it. Transitioning from a dominant manufacturer to a struggling entity weighed down by legacy costs and failed futuristic bets. The irony is profound. Ford pioneered mass production with the Model T. They defined the American truck with the F-Series. And now, in trying to pioneer the electric truck, they may have mortally wounded themselves. This is the unvarnished, brutal truth of the F-150 Lightning recall, and the $6 billion disaster that it represents. The dream of electrifying America's best-selling vehicle has collided with the reality of battery chemistry, manufacturing complexity, and customer expectations. And Ford is left holding the smoking wreckage of a strategy that bet everything, and lost.